What happens when two strangers, burdened by loss and mistrust, are forced to walk the same path across a land that wants to keep them apart? The answer is found in a story where survival meets the possibility of something more. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the rolling plains as Thomas Reed wiped sweat from his brow. At 42, he'd spent nearly 20 years building his small cattle ranch 30 miles outside of Austin. The drought of 1876 had been brutal, turning the usually lush landscape into a palette of browns and yellows. His weathered hands gripped the reins of his chestnut mare as he surveyed the boundary of his property. "Come on, Penny," he muttered to his horse. "Let's check the North Creek before heading back." The loneliness of ranch life had settled into his bones over the years. His wife Sarah had died in childbirth 8 years ago, taking their unborn son with her. The neighboring ranchers had their families, their laughter around dinner tables. Thomas had his cattle, his small cabin, and memories that grew fainter with each passing season. As he approached the creek, the sound of splashing water caught his attention. Rounding a bend of cottonwood trees, he pulled Penny to a halt. A woman knelt by the water, filling a deerskin water pouch. Her long black hair hung in a single braid down her back, traditional Comanche clothing adorning her slender frame. Thomas remained still, not wanting to startle her. The tensions between settlers and the Comanche had eased somewhat in recent years, but distrust ran deep on both sides. As if sensing his presence, she turned suddenly, dark eyes widening. "I mean no harm," Thomas said, raising his hands slightly. "This is my land, but you're welcome to the water." The woman stood, clutching the water pouch to her chest. Her face bore a fading bruise along one cheekbone, and Thomas noticed she favored her right leg. "You're hurt," he observed. She didn't respond, eyes darting to the trees behind her as if calculating an escape. "Do you speak English?" Thomas asked. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded once. "I'm Thomas Reed. This is my ranch." The woman regarded him warily. "I go now," she said, her English halting but clear. "Wait," Thomas called as she turned to leave. "Are you alone? Where's your tribe?" A flash of pain crossed her features. "No tribe, not anymore." Thomas dismounted slowly. "What's your name?" She stared at him, conflict evident in her expression. "I don't have a name," she finally said. "Not now." The statement confused Thomas, but he could see she was exhausted, injured, and likely hungry. "I have food at my cabin," he offered. "Medicine for your wounds. No strings attached. You can leave whenever you want." Suspicion clouded her features. "Why white man help?" Thomas considered her question. "Because I know what it's like to be alone," he answered honestly. Something in his voice must have reached her, because after a long moment, she gave a slight nod. As they walked toward his cabin, Thomas kept a respectful distance. "You must have had a name once," he ventured. "Once," she agreed. "When I had people, now I am no one." "Everyone's someone," Thomas replied. "If you won't tell me your name, perhaps someday I'll give you mine." The woman glanced at him sharply, but said nothing. Back at the cabin, Thomas tended to her injuries with awkward care. A deep gash on her leg had become infected, and he cleaned it as gently as he could. She remained stoic, barely flinching despite what must have been considerable pain. "How did this happen?" he asked. "Buffalo hunters," she replied, her voice bitter. "They attacked our small camp. 3 days ago, I escaped. Others did not." Thomas's jaw tightened. He'd heard stories of such attacks, random violence against native people who had already lost so much. "You can stay here until you heal," he offered. "There's a small storage room. It's not much, but it's dry and safe." She studied his face, searching for deceit or ulterior motives. "Why?" Thomas sighed. "I told you. I know loneliness. And no one deserves to die from infection in the wilderness when there's shelter available." That night, as Thomas lay in his bed listening to the occasional creak of floorboards, as his unexpected guest moved about in the adjacent room, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. The neighboring ranchers wouldn't approve of him harboring a Comanche woman. But something about her dignity in the face of suffering had stirred something in him that had been dormant for years. "Sarah," he whispered to the memory of his wife, "I think I've finally found someone more stubborn than you were." The night wind whispered through the gaps in the cabin walls, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant howl of coyotes, as two solitary souls found unexpected shelter under the same roof. 3 weeks passed with a routine established between Thomas and the woman he'd begun to call Willow in his mind, after the graceful way she moved despite her injuries. She never offered her real name, and he didn't press. Her wounds slowly healed under his care, and as her strength returned, she began to help around the ranch. One morning, Thomas found her expertly mending a torn saddle blanket, her fingers working the needle with practiced precision. "You're good at that," he remarked. She didn't look up. "Comanche women learn such things young. Will you tell me about your people?" Thomas asked, sitting across from her. She paused, needle poised mid-stitch. "Why do you want to know?" "Because you're here, and I know almost nothing about you." Willow set down her work. "My father was great warrior. My mother taught me plants that heal, plants that harm. One married at 16 summers. A shadow crossed her face. My husband and son died 2 winters ago. Smallpox from white traders," Thomas winced. "I'm sorry. I stayed with my brother's family after, until buffalo hunters came." Her voice remained even, but her knuckles whitened around the needle. "They killed all. I ran. They caught me, but I escaped again when they slept." The stark recounting of tragedy delivered in such measured tones made Thomas's heart ache more than if she'd broken down in tears. "My wife died in childbirth," he offered quietly. 8 years ago now," Willow nodded. "I saw her picture. By your bed. Sarah. She was kind. Stubborn as the day is long, but kind." A small smile touched Willow's lips. "Stubborn women make best wives." Thomas laughed, surprised by the hint of humor. "That they do." Later that day, as Thomas repaired a fence line, he spotted riders approaching. He recognized Walter Benson and his son James from the neighboring ranch. "Thomas," Walter called, reining in his horse. "Thought we'd check on you. Ain't seen you in town lately." "Been busy with the herd," Thomas replied. "How's Martha and the girls?" Doing fine, doing fine. James here is getting hitched next month. You remember Emily Peterson?" Thomas congratulated the young man, making small talk while keeping an eye on the cabin. He hoped Willow would stay inside, out of sight. "Say, Thomas," Walter lowered his voice, "there's been talk of Comanche in the area. Small band maybe, survivors from one of them reservations up north. You seen anything?" Thomas shook his head. "All quiet here." "Well, keep your rifle loaded. Some of the boys are organizing a patrol. These savages can't be trusted." The casual hatred in Walter's voice made Thomas's stomach turn. "I think most of them just want to be left alone, Walt." Walter's expression hardened. "That kind of thinking gets settlers killed, Tom. You lived out here long enough to know better." After the Bensons departed, Thomas returned to the cabin to find Willow standing rigidly by the window. "They want to hunt my people," she stated flatly. "They're afraid," Thomas said, though it felt like a weak excuse. "As am I. But I do not hunt what I fear." Her dark eyes met his. "I should leave, bring danger to you." "No," Thomas said, surprising himself with his vehemence. "You're not healed enough for travel. And where would you go? There are Comanche bands to the west. If any survived." Thomas felt a sudden hollow sensation at the thought of her leaving. "At least wait until you're fully recovered, please." Something in his plea reached her, and she nodded once. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Thomas found himself speaking of Sarah, of dreams they'd had for children, for the ranch. Willow listened in silence, her presence somehow making the memories less painful to recall. "You are a kind man, Thomas Reed," she finally said. "Your wife chose well." "And you?" he asked. "What was your husband like?" A soft smile touched her lips. "Strong, proud, made me laugh even when angry." You must miss him terribly. Every day, she agreed. But Comanche believes spirits of loved ones stay close. Watch over us. Thomas contemplated this. I'd like to think Sarah's watching over me too. Perhaps she guided me to your creek, Willow suggested. Perhaps your wife and my husband arranged our meeting. The idea brought unexpected comfort to Thomas. They sat in companionable silence as darkness claimed the land and stars appeared one by one. I once had a name that meant singing bird, Willow said so quietly Thomas almost missed it. But when all who called me by that name died, the name died too. Then I'll give you mine, Thomas whispered, the words escaping before he could consider them. Willow's head turned sharply toward him, eyes widening in surprise. I didn't mean ... I just ... Thomas stumbled over his words, embarrassed by the implication. I only meant you could use Reed as a name. Until you find your people again. Willow studied him in the growing darkness, her expression unreadable. Names have power, Thomas Reed. Be careful what you offer. The night stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities and the whispered warnings of the wind across the plains. As summer transitioned to fall, Willow's presence at the ranch became something Thomas couldn't imagine living without. She had transformed the stark cabin with small touches, plants hanging to dry from the rafters, intricate beadwork appearing on everyday items, and stews simmering with flavors Thomas had never experienced. One crisp October morning, Thomas found Willow on horseback, riding Penny with a natural grace that made horse and rider appear as one. You're good with her, Thomas called. She usually doesn't take to strangers. Willow guided the mare to a stop beside him. Horses know truth in people. They see past skin. Wish people could do the same, Thomas replied, thinking of Walter Benson's patrol and the growing tension in the region. Some can, Willow said, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. That afternoon, they rode together to check on a distant part of the herd. The easy silence between them felt comfortable now, no longer awkward or strained. As they crested a hill overlooking a valley of golden grass, Willow pulled her horse to a stop. Someone comes, she said, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance. Thomas squinted against the sun. Riders, at least 5. They retreated to a stand of trees, watching as the group approached. Thomas recognized Walter Benson and his son, along with 3 other men from town. It's Walter's patrol, Thomas said grimly. We should head back to the cabin. They follow our tracks, Willow observed. They know 2 riders came this way. Thomas considered their options. I'll ride down to meet them. You circle back to the cabin through the creek bed. Water won't hold tracks. Willow shook her head. No, I will not hide forever. Willow, these men. My name was Tabby, she interrupted. It means son. Thomas stared at her, stunned by the revelation. If I run now, I run forever, she continued. I am tired of running, Thomas. Before he could stop her, she urged her horse forward, down the hill toward the approaching riders. Thomas cursed and followed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Walter spotted them first, raising a hand to halt his companions. Thomas, what in Tarnation? ... His words died as he registered Willow beside Thomas. Afternoon, Walt, Thomas said, keeping his voice casual. Something wrong with the herd? You harboring an Indian, Tom? Walter's hand rested on his pistol. This is Tab, Thomas replied evenly. She's been helping me with the ranch. Helping you? James Benson sneered. That what they call it these days? Thomas felt his temper rising. Watch your mouth, boy. She one of them Comanche we been tracking? Asked one of the other men, a hard-faced rancher named Dawson. She's a guest on my property, Thomas stated firmly. Walter's expression darkened. Have you lost your mind, Tom? After what these savages did to the Peterson family. 3 children dead. I did not harm your people, Tabb spoke, her voice clear and steady. My family was killed by buffalo hunters. I alone survived. She's lying, Dawson spat. They all lie. I want you all off my land, Thomas said, moving his horse slightly in front of Tabbe's. Now, Walter shook his head. Can't do that, Tom. We got orders from the territorial marshal. All Comanche are to be escorted to Fort Sill Reservation. Or shot if they resist, added Dawson with a twisted smile. Thomas's hand moved to his rifle. She's under my protection. Don't be a fool, Walter warned. You're outnumbered. Then it'll be a fair fight, Thomas replied coldly. The tension stretched between them like a bowstring pulled too tight. Thomas could feel Tabe's steady presence behind him, unwavering. Your wife would be ashamed, Walter said quietly. Taking up with a savage, something snapped in Thomas. Sarah would have welcomed her with open arms, you ignorant bastard. Now get off my land before I put a hole in you. Walter stared at him for a long moment, then turned to his companions. We'll be back, Thomas, with the marshal. He flicked his reins. Let's go, boys. As the riders retreated, Thomas felt the tension drain from his body, leaving him shaky. You should not have done that, Tob said softly. Now you are enemy to your own people. Thomas turned to face her. They're not my people if they can't see you as human. Back at the cabin, Thomas began gathering supplies, his movements urgent. We need to leave, he explained. Walter won't wait long before returning with reinforcements. Where will we go? Tob asked. Thomas paused. There's talk of Comanche bands in the territories to the west. We could try to find your people. And your ranch, your home? Thomas looked around the cabin, at the life he'd built over 20 years. It's just land and timber. Not worth a life. As night fell, they finished their preparations. 2 horses loaded with supplies stood ready outside. Thomas took one last look at Sarah's photograph before carefully wrapping it and placing it in his saddlebag. She would have liked you, he told Taba. In the silver moonlight, Taba approached him, placing a hand gently on his chest. My people have story about stars, she said, looking up at the brilliant canopy above. Each star is soul that found its match. Together, they shine through darkness. Thomas covered her hand with his own. Tabe, he whispered, the name feeling sacred on his tongue. When I said I had no name, she continued, it was because I had no one to speak it with love. Names need love to live. Thomas touched her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. I think I've been waiting for you without knowing it. And I for you, she replied, though I fought against it. Their first kiss was tentative, a whisper of connection under the watchful eyes of the stars. When they parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Then I'll give you mine, he whispered, echoing his words from weeks ago. If you'll have it. Tabe's smile was like the dawn breaking. Perhaps we make new name together. New story. Dawn found Thomas and Tabe riding west, following game trails through rolling hills. They traveled cautiously, avoiding main roads and settlements. Each night, they made camp in sheltered locations, speaking in hushed tones around small, smokeless fires. On the 3rd day, they spotted a column of dust on the horizon behind them. Riders, Tob confirmed, her keen eyes narrowing. Many, the marshal's posse, Thomas grimaced. We need to find cover. They pushed their horses harder, making for a line of rugged hills ahead. As they entered the foothills, Tabe suddenly reined in her mount. Wait, she commanded, scanning the terrain. This place. I know these hills. Thomas pulled up beside her. From before? She nodded, excitement lighting her features. My mother's people had summer camps near here. There are caves. She pointed to a ridge. There. The caves provided perfect shelter, deep enough for concealment, but with multiple exits if needed. As the posse's dust cloud grew closer, Thomas and Tabe retreated into the labyrinth of stone passages. They will not find us here, Tabe assured him. Only Comanche know these caves. As they settled into wait, Thomas noticed markings on the cave walls' handprints. Animal figures, symbols he didn't recognize. My ancestors, Tabe explained, running her fingers reverently over a series of marks. Stories of our people. What does this one say? Thomas asked, pointing to a complex pattern. It tells of great drought, many generations ago. How people survived by following dream visions to water. She smiled softly. Perhaps like how I found your creek. Thomas took her hand. I'm glad you did. They remained in the caves for 2 days, venturing out only at night to check for signs of pursuit. On the morning of the 3rd day, Tab woke Thomas with urgency. "Listen," she whispered. At first, Thomas heard nothing. Then he caught it, the distant sound of horses, but not the organized movement of a posse. These were single calls, signals exchanged between riders. Tabe's eyes widened. Comanche signals. Before Thomas could respond, she was moving toward the cave entrance. He followed, heart pounding with equal measures of hope and apprehension. Outside, they climbed to a vantage point. In the valley below, a small band of Comanche had made camp, perhaps 20 people with horses and travois loaded with belongings. "My uncle's band," Tab breathed, recognition dawning. "He lives." Thomas watched emotions play across her face: joy, relief, uncertainty. "Your family," he said gently. She turned to him, conflict in her eyes. "Yes, but ... But what?" "They will not welcome you easily," she admitted. "And I will not go without you." Thomas squared his shoulders. "Then we face them together." They approached the camp openly, hands visible. The response was immediate. Warriors moved to defensive positions. Women gathered children, and an older man stepped forward, spear in hand. Tab called out in Comanche, her voice carrying across the distance. The older man froze, then rushed forward, disbelief transforming his weathered face. The reunion was emotional tears and embraces, rapid exchanges in Comanche that Thomas couldn't follow. He stood apart, aware of suspicious glances and whispered comments. Finally, Tab turned to him, taking his hand and leading him forward. "This is my uncle, Chief Running Elk," she said in English. "Uncle, this is Thomas Reed. He saved my life when buffalo hunters attacked our camp." The chief studied Thomas with penetrating eyes. "You bring white man to our hiding place," he said in accented English. "Dangerous." "He left everything to help me escape those who would harm me," Tab replied firmly. "He is hunted now too, because of me." Running Elk circled Thomas slowly. Why would white rancher risk life for Comanche woman? Thomas met the chief's gaze steadily. "Because she is worth more than land or cattle." "Because I love her." Murmurs rippled through the gathered tribe. Running Elk's expression remained impassive. "Love between white and Comanche brings only pain," he stated flatly. "Our ways are not your ways." "Uncle," Tav interjected, "the old world is dying. For both our peoples, perhaps new ways must be found." An elderly woman stepped forward, her face deeply lined with age. She spoke rapidly in Comanche to Running Elk, occasionally gesturing toward Thomas and Tabe. "My grandmother says she has dreamed of you." Tab translated for Thomas. "A white man and Comanche woman who build bridge between worlds." Running Elk looked troubled. "Dreams are sacred, but reality is harsh. The white men who follow you will not stop." "Then we keep moving," Thomas suggested. "There's talk of unclaimed territories in New Mexico. Land where people might live in peace." The discussion continued into the night. Plans debated, options weighed. Some tribal members argued for sending Thomas away, others for accepting him as Tabe's chosen one. As dawn approached, Running Elk finally raised his hand for silence. "The spirits have spoken through my mother's dreams," he announced. "The white man may journey with us. His fate is tied to Tabe's now and to ours." Relief washed over Thomas. Tab squeezed his hand, her smile radiant in the firelight. The tribe broke camp with practiced efficiency. By mid-morning, they were moving west, toward territories less settled by white men. As they rode, Tav moved her horse alongside Thomas's. "My grandmother says we will find a valley where mountains touch the sky," she told him. "A place where our children can grow in peace." "Children?" Thomas raised an eyebrow, smiling. Tabe's eyes sparkled. "A girl and 2 boys, according to her dream." Thomas laughed, the sound carrying on the wind. "And does she dream their names as well?" "No," Tab replied softly. "Names come from living, from seeing who a person becomes." "Like you became Tab again," Thomas observed. She nodded. "And like I may someday become Tave Reed, if your offer still stands." Thomas reined his horse to a stop, causing those behind to halt as well. Ignoring the curious onlookers, he leaned across the space between their mounts. "It stands now and forever," he said, before kissing her beneath the endless blue sky. That evening, as the band made camp against a backdrop of distant mountains, Running Elk approached Thomas. "My niece says you once told her everyone is someone," the chief said. "This is true wisdom," Thomas nodded. "I believe it with all my heart." "Then perhaps there is hope," Running Elk conceded. "For all our children." As stars appeared above them, Thomas and Tob stood hand in hand at the edge of camp. Behind them lay the world they had known, divided, violent, unyielding. Before them stretched possibilities unmarked on any map. "Are you afraid?" Thomas asked softly. Tob considered the question. "Yes," she admitted. "But fear walked with me even before I met you. Now at least I do not walk alone." Thomas squeezed her hand. "Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," she echoed, as the first star of evening blazed to life above the distant mountains, illuminating the path ahead with possibilities yet to be written. The journey to New Mexico territories stretched across weeks, each day bringing new challenges and revelations. The small Comanche band traveled cautiously, avoiding settlements and army patrols with a practiced vigilance that Thomas came to admire. He watched Tob integrate back into tribal life, while still maintaining the connection they'd forged at his ranch. One evening, as they made camp in a sheltered canyon, Thomas noticed Tabby in conversation with her grandmother, Morning Star. The elderly woman's gnarled hands gestured animatedly as she spoke, occasionally pointing to distant landmarks. "What was that about?" Thomas asked when Tob joined him by their small fire. "Grandmother says we are near sacred places," Tob explained, settling beside him. "Land where ancient ones lived long before Comanche or white man." Thomas handed her a cup of coffee. "Is that why Running Elk chose this route?" "Partly," she nodded. "These canyons offer protection, but they also hold power. Grandmother wishes to visit a place of visions before we continue west." At dawn, a small group separated from the main band, Thomas, Tob, Morning Star, Running Elk, and 2 warriors as escorts. They traveled deeper into the maze of red rock. Canyons, the morning sun casting long shadows across the ancient landscape. By midday, they reached a secluded box canyon. At its far end, beneath an overhanging shelf of stone, ancient paintings covered the rock face. Handprints, spirals, figures both human and animal intertwined in stories Thomas couldn't decipher. Morning Star approached the wall reverently, touching it with trembling fingers. She began a low melodic chant that echoed through the canyon. "This is very old place," Tob whispered to Thomas. "Older than Comanche. Grandmother says spirits of all people speak here." Running Elk joined his mother at the wall, producing a small pouch from which he took pinches of something Thomas couldn't identify, placing them carefully on a natural stone shelf beneath the paintings. "Offerings," Tob explained, "to honor those who came before." As the sun reached its zenith, Morning Star beckoned Thomas forward. Hesitantly, he approached the ancient woman who studied him with eyes that seemed to see beyond his physical presence. She spoke in Comanche, her voice surprisingly strong for one so frail. "She says you must place your hand on the wall," Tob translated, "where the ancient ones left their marks." Thomas glanced uncertainly at Running Elk, who gave a curt nod. Stepping forward, Thomas pressed his palm against a faded handprint on the rock surface. The stone felt unexpectedly warm beneath his touch. Morning Star continued speaking, circling Thomas slowly. "Grandmother says your spirit is older than your years," Tob translated. "She says you have lived before, as has your love for me." Thomas felt a strange chill despite the afternoon heat. "What does she mean?" Tabé's expression was solemn. "Our peoples have fought and loved across many lifetimes. She sees an old pattern being broken in us." Morning Star suddenly grasped Thomas's free hand, placing it together with Tabé's. She wrapped a strip of woven cloth around their joined hands. speaking rapidly as she worked. "A binding," Running Elk explained in English, surprising Thomas. "In our way, you are now joined." Thomas looked at Tabi, whose eyes shimmered with emotion. "Is this ... are we married now?" She smiled. "In the eyes of my people, yes, if you accept." "I accept with all my heart," Thomas replied without hesitation. Morning. Star unwrapped their hands but indicated they should remain joined. She reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew something that glinted in the sunlight, a silver ring. "This belonged to a woman captured by Comanche long ago," Running Elk explained. "She became one of us, married a warrior. Morning Star has kept it, waiting for the circle to complete." Thomas watched in astonishment as the old woman slipped the tarnished silver band onto Tabe's finger. "For generations, blood has answered blood between our peoples," Running Elk continued. "Perhaps now love will answer love instead." That night, as the small group rejoined the main band, a celebration began. Despite the need for caution, drums beat softly, and voices rose in songs Thomas didn't understand but felt in his bones. He and Tab sat together, receiving gifts and blessings from tribal members who had earlier regarded him with suspicion. "Not everyone approves," Tab said quietly, nodding toward a group of warriors who sat apart, their expressions guarded. "Some wounds heal slowly. We have time," Thomas replied. "If your grandmother's visions are true." 3 days later, the band crossed into territory that Running Elk claimed was unknown to most white settlers. The landscape changed. Pine forests appeared on distant slopes, and the air carried the scent of water. "My scouts have found valley beyond those hills," Running Elk told Thomas one morning, pointing to a blue-tinged ridge on the horizon. "Good water, shelter, game, place to rest before winter comes." Thomas studied the distant mountains. "How far to the valley your mother spoke of?" "The permanent settlement. 2 weeks more, if weather holds." Running Elk squinted at the sky. "But first, we prepare for winter. Cannot travel mountain passes in snow." The valley proved to be everything Running Elk had promised: a hidden paradise, with a clear stream, abundant game, and natural shelter from harsh winds. The band set about establishing winter camp with practiced efficiency, erecting tipis and constructing more permanent brush shelters. Thomas found himself working alongside the tribal men, learning techniques for weatherproofing shelters and preserving meat that were new to him. In turn, he shared knowledge from his ranching days, methods for predicting weather patterns and managing livestock through difficult seasons. As the first snowflakes began to fall, Thomas and Tabi moved into the small brush shelter they had built together. It stood slightly apart from the main camp, not so far as to be isolated, but enough to give them privacy. Inside, Tabi had created a home that blended both their worlds, Thomas's books and Sarah's silver hairbrush alongside Comanche weavings and tools. A small fire pit in the center provided warmth and light, smoke rising through a carefully constructed chimney. "Do you miss your ranch?" Tabi asked as they lay beneath buffalo robes, listening to the wind. Thomas considered the question. "I miss what it represented: years of work, a dream Sarah and I shared. But this," he pulled her closer, "this is worth more." Tavi traced the lines of his face with gentle fingers. "In spring, we will find our permanent home. Grandmother says it lies near where sun sets behind Twin Peaks." "And what else does your grandmother see in our future?" Thomas asked, smiling. "She sees children with your eyes and my spirit," Tavi replied. "She sees challenges, but also joy." The winter months passed in a rhythm of survival and discovery. Thomas learned the Comanche language, stumbling over pronunciations that made the children laugh and the elders smile indulgently. In turn, he taught reading to those interested, starting with Tabi, who absorbed written English with remarkable speed. The winter was not without tensions. Twice, hunting parties reported seeing white settlers in nearby valleys. Once, A group of tribal warriors argued heatedly with Running Elk about the wisdom of allowing Thomas to know their winter location. "Some fear you will bring others," Tob explained after one such confrontation. "I would die before betraying your people," Thomas replied firmly. "I know this," she said, "but trust comes slowly to those who have lost much." As winter's grip began to loosen, Thomas noticed Tabi becoming quieter, more introspective. She spent long hours with Morning Star, learning ancient remedies and listening to stories passed down through generations. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the snowy landscape in hues of pink and gold, Tob took Thomas's hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "Grandmother was right," she said softly, "about our children." Thomas's eyes widened as understanding dawned. We single quotes Tav nodded, her smile radiant. "A new life grows within me, a bridge between worlds." Thomas gathered her in his arms, emotions too powerful for words overwhelming him. He thought of Sarah, of the child they had lost, and felt a bittersweet certainty that she would approve of this new chance at family. As spring brought new growth to the valley, the band prepared to continue their journey. Thomas watched Tabe, her pregnancy now visible beneath her clothing, directing younger women in packing medicinal plants she had gathered. Running Elk approached, following Thomas's gaze. "She will be great medicine woman someday," the chief observed. "Like her grandmother." "She amazes me every day," Thomas agreed. Running Elk studied him thoughtfully. "When we first met, I thought you would bring destruction to my people. Now, I see you bring something else." "What's that?" Thomas asked. "Hope," the chief replied simply, "for a future different from our past." As the band moved out of the valley, Thomas rode beside Tavi, their hands occasionally reaching across the space between their horses to touch. Behind them lay the world they had known, divided by hatred and misunderstanding. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, but also possibility. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked as they crested a ridge, the path before them stretching toward distant mountains. Tob smiled, one hand resting protectively over her growing child. "We have always been ready for this journey," she replied. "Even before we knew it waited for us." Together they rode forward, toward a future written in the stars, but shaped by their own hands, a testament to the power of love to overcome the boundaries drawn by men.